The BYU Cougars improved to 8-0 with their win over UCF on Saturday and moved up in the national polls once again. This is a team that is absolutely on the cusp of doing something special. Now, it's already been special, but it could be even more special. And we'll explain why as we recap the UCF game and also look ahead to a 2-week buildup to the Holy War.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who like to call everydayers right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. All right, let's dive right in on today's show. Monday. The BYU Cougars are coming off a 37-24 road win at UCF. A pretty fun ride home for the Cougars on that long flight from Orlando. But you saw the Rock if you watched the social media reaction out there at the Provo Airport at 1:30 in the morning, Sunday morning, celebrating with the players. Kind of shows the power of what this BYU team is doing right now. But as I rewatched this game from the BYU Cougars, is the biggest thing I took away is this team's playing with swagger, folks. I watched the opening snaps of that game, and Jake Retzlaff's over there bobbing and weaving to the I remember what song was playing down there at the Bounce House in Orlando, but he's bouncing along. The players are just playing with an incredible amount of confidence, and it's evident in the way that they play the game. Rewatching this against UCF, my overall take was the BYU was far and away the better team. And that doesn't even include the fact they struggled at points in this game. Remember, this is at one point. But as I said on our postcast edition, I'll reiterate here, it seems like every time BYU absorbs a punch or a flurry of punches, to use the boxing analogy, they seem to punch back with one of their own. They get a right hook in or a jab or, heaven forbid, an uppercut at times, and they're just off and rolling at that point. Watching back, BYU gets the game to 17, score a field goal to get 17-10 the score line. Now, there's just a couple of minutes. There's not even 2 minutes left in the first half. And BYU stared at the prospect of going into the locker room up one score, UCF getting the ball after halftime, and who knows what might have happened at that point. What does Jake Retzlaff do? And Connor Pace said it last week on this podcast. You can go back and listen to it. He said that there are very few quarterbacks, if any, who are as good in the 2-minute offense as Jake Retzlaff is. All he does is engineer a 32-second drive, a 62-yard touchdown pass to Chase Roberts, and it's all she wrote. At that point, it felt like the wind came completely out of the sails of UCF. By the end of the third quarter, their fans had fled the scene, as it were, and BYU fans had the run of the place. It was a really, really impressive victory for BYU. Now, a couple of notes. I've got this on my phone here, looking at this. BYU came into the game averaging 32.9% on third down. As they flash on the graphic on TV, that was 121st in the country. It's just not been good enough in terms of converting third downs overall. Now, BYU coaches have explained that they like to go for it on fourth down if they can get to manageable situations. So you have to look at it in its totality, because BYU is now something like they've only not converted on 3 fourth down conversions, and they're somewhere near 20 number there. But in this game against UCF, BYU very good on third down. Finished 7 of 15, near 50%. And I really like the way that they handled their business on third down. That's a big part of, I think, what the offense is doing. The other thing is Jake Retzlaff, midway through the third quarter, I've got the exact time here, midway through the third quarter, Jake Retzlaff had 220 yards so about 5 minutes to go in the third quarter. He completed his second to last pass, gets to 220 yards on the game. The final 20 minutes of that game, BYU had one pass completion for 8 yards and just piled up rushing yards. The final 20 minutes of that game were just absolute bully ball from the BYU offense. What I'm seeing from this offensive line is that they are getting better struggled against what I believe is probably the best tandem of defensive tackles BYU has seen since SMU earlier this season. Bruce Mitchell, for the first time this season, looked like he struggled a little bit. The offensive line as a whole struggled a little bit, and I unfairly maligned Braden Keim on the strip sack on Jake Retzlaff. That's actually Ethan Erickson who got victimized in pass pro there, and that sack, I think, goes more on Ethan Erickson's inability to keep the defensive end off of Jake Retzlaff in that scenario. I look at this offensive unit, and it is finally starting to round into what I believe is the quote-unquote finished product for BYU offensively this year. About as balanced of an offensive performance as you're going to see from BYU. Second straight week of over 250 rushing yards. One thing I'm loving that I'm seeing now from BYU is now that LJ Martin is fully healthy and Hinkley Rapati also showed flashes of this, is that BYU is a team that likes to use that wide zone running scheme, but also likes to use the inside zone scheme as well in the run ability. BYU earlier this season without LJ Martin, inside zone was a foolhardy thing. Remember, there were guys like Hinkley Rapati, Miles Davis, who were running in the middle of this offensive line and just getting absolutely stoned. Now that LJ Martin is using his vision to set up blocks, the offensive line is starting to work in concert with one another and getting some familiarity with what they're supposed to do. Inside zone is now a weapon once again for BYU. And if they can mix the wide zone as well as inside zone, along with any read options, fly sweeps, and the other things they use off of those run concepts, this is a BYU offense that really is going to be a force if it really all comes together. Now, they've got 4 games to still prove it is a finished product, and we'll see if they really erupt at some point, points-wise, yardage-wise, etc. But right now, I really like the way this offense is operating. It's operating near what I believe is peak efficiency for them. I'm sure that the coaches and players, when we talk to them, will say, well, we're nowhere near what we believe we can be. We'll have Connor Pay on the podcast here later this week. So looking forward to that conversation. I'll get his thought on it. But I really, really think this offense, it's trending to where it needs to be. And if it comes to where BYU can essentially go 250 pass and 250 rush every single game, they'll have a fighting chance in literally every game, even if it comes to the Big 12 championship, college football playoff, whatever the future might hold in the postseason for BYU. I believe the Cougars, if that offense is as good as I believe it can become, and it's becoming right now, that's a special unit that could be a force for the BYU Cougars. Now, a couple other notes. Defensively, the linebacking tandem of Isaiah Glasker, Jack Kelly, and Harrison Taggart is absolutely awesome right now. The 3 of them know essentially where each other are going to be on any given play. And if one of them makes a mistake, more often than not, one of the other guys is there to clean it up. The biggest thing is from defense, if you look at the big plays in that game for UCF, the big runs by RJ Harvey, there were some big passes to Jacoby Jones as well in this one, is essentially every one of those plays, was an assignment error. So I look at the RJ Harvey situation, for example. On the first RJ Harvey run up the sideline, if you recall that one early in the game, it was Isaiah Glasker and Crew Wakely essentially getting into the same gap run responsibility-wise when one of them was supposed to be in the other gap that would have prevented that from happening. Well, RJ Harvey, being a very, very good running back, bounces it to the outside and hurts BYU on that. The other one was more up the middle where Isaiah Moa got a little bit out of position, got his eyes in the backfield, and RJ Harvey exploited the fact that he was not in his gap at the right time and picked up a big gain. You look at what happened with Jacoby Jones. It was a missed assignment or late in the game on that final touchdown from Dylan Risk as the quarterback for UCF. The cornerback and the safeties did not communicate adequately. It was more of a strong safety and cornerback miscommunication. I know that Tanner Wall had to come over and try and clean it up, but based on what I saw in film, it was more the corner and the strong safety versus Wall as the free safety being at fault there. And then earlier in the game, Mark Collins just missed a tackle. BYU's defense is playing really, really good football right now, but good teams make you pay when you don't have your right assignments filled. And that's what the UCF offense did. And by and large, BYU's defense shut them down, but they were a feast or famine all the time, it felt like, for UCF. They popped a big play, they had a chance to score. If they didn't, couldn't do anything at all. So really overall pleased with what I took away from BYU's defensive effort. And I really like the fact that these are fixable mistakes. Like I said, run fits, making sure your gap sound. That's stuff you can absolutely continue to coach and get guys up to speed on, but it's not like you're like at a loss for what's happening. BYU, and if I can, by the way, if I as an amateur film junkie over here can see that, trust me, Jay Hill, Justin Enna, Kalani Sitake, any of the coaches in BYU's building, even the players themselves will see it and say, hey, okay, yeah, we know what we need to fix. Final note I wanted to pass along is I am still absolutely enthralled with the fake field goal. To have a snap and then a snap from Sam Vanderhaar to Will Ferrin, absolutely incredible play. And I saw some complaints that, hey, all Will Ferrin needs to do is just throw that ball up. Mata'ava Ta'ase is going to come down with it and race for a touchdown. Rewatching the play based on what I could see, I completely understand why Will Ferrin didn't throw it, because the defender was closing very hard on Ta'ase. And if Will Ferrin couldn't fire that ball in with the accuracy that needed to get it there on time, very well could have been a pass breakup. So props to him for picking up the yardage necessary there and getting the first down. That's all that really mattered at that point. Yeah, you would have liked to have the touchdown, but I really think that was a phenomenal decision by Will Ferrin just to pick up the first down yardage and live to play another down. A couple of guys who stood out to me on film as well, I wanted to give a shout out to. I already mentioned one of them, Mata'ava Ta'ase. It's incredible how efficient he is this season. 4 catches, 3 touchdowns. Give that kid extra looks. He is the best run blocker, bar none, among the tight ends for my money watching BYU play. He is absolutely lights out. He deserves more looks, I think, in the passing game, because all he does is catch touchdowns, apparently. So why not throw it up to him and give him more opportunities in that regard? Isaiah Glasker remains just an absolute sensation. I already shouted out him and his other 2 compatriots at linebacker, and Harrison Taggart and Jack Kelly. All 3 of them are absolutely killing it right now. Blake Mangelson stood out on film once again on a second viewing of this game, but I need to watch it a second time to see him do his thing. He was a star the first time just watching the game in general. And then I also want to give a shout out to LJ Martin. I'm telling you, I talked about this in postcast, but LJ Martin is trending towards becoming the next in a long line of really, really good running backs. He's got NFL written all over him. That's his future, folks. He is a really, really phenomenal player. And I'll reiterate that BYU took him out late in this game just to protect him. They need to get him healthy and keep him healthy. He was limping a little bit in that game, but he would have been able to finish the game had he needed to, in talking with people around the program. But they felt like Hinckley Rapati was running it as well as anybody at that point. They decided to let him finish the game off, and he rewarded BYU with a very strong performance in his own right running the football. So those are some of the guys I wanted to shout out. Chase Roberts, Darius Laster continue to be absolute studs. Jake Retzlaff is just Mr. Steady Eddie, if not a downright star for BYU. This is a really, really good football team. That's my overall takeaways. And that's easy to say when you're 8-0, but I'm telling you, I'm watching this team get better every time they take the field. And that's the hallmark of a team that's not satisfied and ready to rest on their laurels at this point. They know what's out there for them. As they flashed on the TV in that broadcast, is BYU before beating UCF was something in the 20% range of making the college football playoff. With that one win alone, their projection is 60+% chance of going to the college football playoff. So if you've got plans this December, you may want to break them, because BYU could be playing some very, very maybe biggest game type stuff in 40 years of BYU football. Now, if there's something developing here that history tells us about BYU football that we should be paying attention to, and could history be repeating itself? Well, a good friend of mine decided to give me a little bit of a tip on something he noticed, and he is an absolute historian and just an incredible has an incredible ability to recall stuff when it comes to BYU football history. And we're going to talk about a recollection he has that I think could line up very well for BYU as they head into this game against Utah in just under 2 weeks' time. And we'll dig into that next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. They get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, as they are America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. When you have the hunch in the middle of a game, you're like, hey, man, I got a feeling about this. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing your bets. And the best part is you can just go to FanDuel.com to join, and you'll get started with that $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Simple as that. Put $5 down, it wins, you get $150 in bonus bets. It's as simple as that. That's FanDuel.com to take advantage of this offer today. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. Cannot thank you guys enough for your support of the podcast. We've seen just absolutely gargantuan numbers in terms of downloads, views, likes, comments. Everything you guys are doing to support the show is much appreciated. I know I don't talk about it enough here on the show, but just wanted to issue a public shout out to all y'all. A couple of corrections and retractions from this past show, by the way. I did make a gaffe, and I apologize for not looking into this, because they did mention on the broadcast that BYU is 8-0 for the first time since 2001. As a number of you pointed out, BYU did start 9-0 in 2020 before losing at Coastal Carolina. For whatever reason, I was thinking about that. I'm like, I think BYU was 7-0 when they lost to Coastal Carolina. And I went back and looked. No, they were 9-0. So I apologize for that gaffe. And then a couple of you, I appreciate the shout outs, because I love when you guys make sure that I'm held to a higher standard as a broadcaster. A couple of you sent me links and said, hey, Jake, you used the term awry on the show. You pronounced it Owry. Now, I tried to get away with it. I admit this. And something that David James, who I work with on a daily basis on DJ and PK, I'm the producer of that show. I've been so for a decade. He has a penchant for mixing two words at the same time and coming out a little bit weird. I had that same gaffe happen. I had an idea of, I think, all the time, and then awry in my head, and it came out Owry. So that's why. That's why it came out a little bit weird on that postcast edition of the show. So a couple of corrections and retractions, but history might be repeating itself for BYU. So I'm going to give a shout out to my good friend, Robbie Huckville. Some of you probably know him from social media. I call him the Rain Man because he is absolutely got just an impeccable memory when it comes to BYU football history. I can throw random dates, random games, times, scores at him, and more often than not, in literal seconds, he can name exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to BYU football. He sent me this message yesterday, and he said, you should use this on the podcast. And it literally points back to BYU football history, maybe as a guide for what the future holds for BYU. So I'm going to read this verbatim on my phone. This is a message from Rain Man. So Robbie, shout out to you. It says, in 1996, Utah was the preseason WAC favorite in the brand new reorganized WAC conference. Remember, during that era, the WAC had expanded to 16 teams. They had the likes of Tulsa and Rice and SMU, and it was a 16-team league. They're playing that pods division nonsense, the 4-team pods, and Utah was a favorite. So similar to the Utes being a preseason Big 12 favorite in the brand new reorganized Big 12, also with 16 teams. He says this: Utah was the front runner all year long in 1996, and then they got killed by Rice. The next week, speaking of BYU, the Cougars killed Rice. He says, kind of like Arizona beat down Utah, and then BYU beats Arizona earlier this year. Then in 1996, right before BYU played Utah up in Salt Lake City, BYU cracked the top 10. Paid attention yesterday, BYU is now number 9 in the country. They're inside the top 10, and they head to Utah next. Says BYU had a ton of pressure to beat Utah to win that division and go to the WAC title game and then an eventual Alliance Bowl, similar to this year, whereas the Alliance Bowls are now what we call the college football playoff. That was the precursor to the bowl championship series, a.k.a. the BCS. He adds this: BYU went into Salt Lake and installed a run-heavy game plan and abandoned the pass with our non-LDS JUCO transfer Southern California number 12 quarterback, guy named Steve Sarkisian, and BYU eventually pounded the Utes 37-17. Remember, Brian McKenzie, Ronnie Jenkins were absolutely electric in that game, and they did just carve up. It was the most crazy thing to me, because remember, BYU's history was this high-flying passing offense, and they ran for 200-plus yards in that game. Absolutely insane. He says this: Jake Retzlaff is now a non-LDS JUCO transfer quarterback wearing the number 12. Speaking of BYU, could potentially go in with our ground attack and pound the Utes and walk out with a comfortable win and route to an undefeated season and a conference title appearance and a playoff appearance. Are the stars aligning? In a year we brought back our 96 throwback uniforms? Maybe, just maybe. So there you go. I'm telling you, Robbie is he has got an incredible ability to make connections between the eras for BYU football. And I give him mass credit, because I would have never been able to come up with those comparisons. And he did that, I would guarantee, 5 minutes of thinking about it. But is history going to repeat itself? Are we going to watch BYU football go to Rice-Eccles Stadium and emerge victorious, 9-0 on the season, move up in the national polls once again? And unlike 1996, this is the only change that I think would change here, is that the alliance back in the 90s was built specifically to keep programs like BYU at bay and keep them from competing for national championships. In 1996, also BYU already had one loss on the season at this point. Remember, they lost, I think, week 2 or week 3 at Washington, but then made that incredible run, setting the NCAA record for wins in a season with 14, finishing 14-1, and that incredible New Year's Day Bowl win over Kansas State, which they also celebrated not too long ago when K-State came to Provo. This is feeling like a very, very incredible year for BYU football. I have people, like I said, on the postcast edition on Saturday night who ask me continually, are you having the time of your life? Yeah, I really am. I'm having an absolute blast. It's a ton of fun to be watching what BYU is doing. And it's kind of crazy to think about the parallels. 40 years after their national championship, could BYU be back on track to win a national title? What Robbie's saying here, that 1996, kind of the hallmarks of what happened that season. They beat Hawaii to get inside the top 10, then went to Utah and absolutely stomped the Utes 37-17. Is history going to repeat itself for BYU? I think the only change, the only difference between what Robbie talked about in his comparison is that unlike 1996, when the Bull Alliance was around to keep BYU from doing what they could potentially do this year, the college football playoff exists because BYU, if they make the playoff, they have the chance to play for all the marbles, as it were. They can go win a national title. Once again, it feels premature to be putting this pressure on BYU, but the pressure is already building. Look at the national conversations around the BYU football program at this time. They're absolutely getting pumped up left, right, and center. Josh Pate State is a great podcast for 24/7 Sports. He put an entire segment together yesterday, essentially apologizing to BYU for not believing in them. The national consciousness, the national media are starting to come around to this incredible story of BYU football. They were picked 13th in the preseason poll. They have surpassed every expectation, and all they do is keep on winning. Despite being an underdog to a 3-4 team at UCF, BYU took that to heart, used it as fuel for the fire, and went out and absolutely demolished the Knights. Are the national media and the sports books going to underestimate BYU again and put Utah as a favorite? I dare them to do it. If they do that, they're risking everything, because at BYU, they thrive, and they have thrived all season long with the disrespect being shown their way. It's going to be an interesting 2 weeks building up to Utah, but once again, as Rain Man points out, and Robbie is a dear friend of mine, history very well could be repeating itself, and that would be an absolutely incredible story to watch it unfold the way it did in 1996, watch it come full circle in 2024, when, unlike 96, but pointing back to 1984, the national championship is absolutely on the table for the BYU football program. All right, we will finish up today's show flipping over to basketball just for a minute. It's basketball season, crazy enough. We're in late October, getting ready for BYU to take the hardwoods right alongside what BYU football is doing on the gridiron. Well, they had a quote-unquote secret scrimmage over the weekend against Boise State. What came out of that? What can we take away? We'll dig into what we heard and what we know about BYU basketball. Coming up next is Locked On Cougars rolls on. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, Game Time is here for you guys. If you want to get out to an NBA game, I love going to Utah Jazz games. They're one of my favorite things to do with my kids now that they're old enough to understand what's going on. My son and I went to a Utah Hockey Club game the other night for the first time. I'd never been to an NHL game. Absolutely incredible atmosphere. I would encourage everybody, if you have not had an opportunity to watch an NHL game, do it. In person, it's completely different than watching it on TV. But the best part is Game Time is here for you guys to get you out to the events you want to go to. If it's not even sporting events, you go to music, comedy, or theater events, and they've got all the options for you guys. And right now, they have a brand new feature called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play even easier. And the best part about it is you can go online, click on that Game Time Picks app, and talk about the incredible deals that are out there. They curate all kinds of deals amongst thousands of tickets to find the best options for you, get them to you right away, and then you're off and on your way to enjoying the event you're going to. I still love the all-in pricing feature. You can toggle it inside the app. You turn it on, shows you exactly what you're paying up front, so you're not seeing an avalanche of fees tacked on at the end of what you're trying to find and the tickets you're trying to buy. So take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time Picks today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Once again, download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. Would highly encourage you guys to join us on the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. It's a great way to get the inside scoop of what I'm hearing about BYU sports coming to your phone in the form of a text message. The best part about it is you're not having to go to a message board or log onto a website to get the inside scoop on all things BYU. What I'm hearing, send it to you. It comes to you in the form of a text message. You get a 14-day free trial to see if it's the right option for you guys. How you sign up? There's a link in the show notes below. I'm pointing down if you're watching this on YouTube. It's a hyperlink in there. Click on it. Type in your phone number. It's $5 a month after your 14-day free trial to join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. We've seen a major uptick in many members joining the group of late and hope that many more of you will do so in short order as well. All right. Before we go on today's show, the BYU Cougars, speaking of men's basketball under Kevin Young, had their first secret scrimmage against Boise State over the weekend, and they ended up winning that game 91-86. Now, I had multiple people reach out to me and say, Jake, they won this game in spite of not having the full complement of players. What I was told that, among others, Dallin Hall sat out of this game and was not available in this one. Also, I would assume that Mihailo Boskovic, who Kevin Young said that they're still working through compliance issues with at BYU, also sat out of this game. But BYU, despite all that, beats the Boise State Broncos 91-86. Sean Paul from does a lot of college basketball coverage. I remember who Sean works for. It's Action Network. Okay. Also, Phil the 68 mid-major show says this. Richie Saunders led BYU with 25 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 steals. I don't care what happens, it feels like, in any type of basketball scheme. Richie Saunders is just the ultimate of glue guys. But the scoring prowess, 25 points, that's really impressive stuff. If Richie Saunders can add a scoring punch to this BYU offense, in addition to everything else he does, he's a dogged defender. He absolutely relishes the opportunity to shut down opposing teams' best wing players. He adds rebounding, 6 steals. He's just a hard-nosed basketball player. If he can add a scoring punch more than he already does, because I think he's been pretty good about getting 10 or 12 points when needed, but if he can uptick to maybe the upper teens scoring-wise, that makes BYU that much more dangerous, because even then, Richie's already hard to take off the court. But if you can add, once again, the scoring element to his game, he may be just impossible to take off the court outside of having foul trouble. Also pointed out by Sean that Dawson Baker scored 19 points. That's a positive to hear, because remember, he came back for a short stint last season after his foot surgery didn't take. He had to have it redone, speaking of the surgery, to fix the issues with his foot, and it sounds like he is back to full strength now. The one thing about Dawson is he is a bucket getter. He gets to the line. He just knows how to score the basketball. That's good to see him scoring 19 points. And then the man, obviously, Yegor Damien, I should say, 5 points, 8 rebounds. At 6'9", the one thing about Damien is he has got an ability to make plays. And there may be nights where, yeah, he has more of a less of an impact when it comes to scoring overall, but 8 assists, that's really impressive stuff to see that from a guy like Damien. He is a guy that is a bona fide top 10 pick going into next year's NBA draft. And the hope is that everything that he goes out there and proves this season quantifies that. This is a BYU basketball squad that it's got a lot going for it, and it's playing in an absolutely rugged and rough conference. The Big 12, man, could be just an absolute dog-eat-dog conference all season long. But our first real look at BYU, and I do wonder if Dallin Hall will play, comes in terms of if you want to get out to watch them, is Wednesday night against Colorado Christian University. Now, for the life of me, I don't necessarily get it, but they are not going to air this game on TV, ESPN Plus, BYU TV. None of them are going to air it. So if you want to watch it, you got to go out to the Marriott Center Wednesday night. And considering it's their official exhibition game, tickets should be relatively easy to get a hold of if you're looking to get out to it. But that's the only opportunity to see them before they officially tip off the season in just over a week's time. But I'm looking forward to this. I think this BYU basketball team has got a lot going for it. I am cautiously optimistic that Kevin Young's first season with BYU could be absolutely epic. Now, that's not really saying much, because there's all kinds of expectation with what BYU has done on the recruiting trail that, yes, they need to hit the ground running. But the one thing we have not seen quite yet from BYU is we have not seen them really take on an opposing team and watch Kevin Young in live game operations. How does he handle timeouts? How does he handle the in-game adjustments and that type of stuff? By all accounts, he's a very, very capable coach. He's very highly thought of in talking with people who know more about him than I do. they speak very highly of his overall basketball IQ. And he's got a strong staff around him. All of the assistant coaches have got bona fide credentials themselves, and he's assembled an incredible collection of talent. And the biggest part, I think, is finding the best rotation for that talent to obviously maximize their overall ability. But that's what the non-conference slate is for. They've got 13 games of non-conference games to really go out there and coalesce around one another. And then once again, when Big 12 play begins at the end of December, going to be a 2-month slog, it feels like. And it's also a sprint at the same time, because you have to just man up twice a week for some of the toughest basketball that any of these guys, any of them will have played to this point in their lives. But at the same time, it can be a really, really fun year watching BYU on the hardwoods. All right, that is going to do it for this Monday edition of the show. A big thank you, as always, for all y'all's support. It absolutely means the world to me. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. And as always, and if you're not already, make sure you do this. Become an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.